So I wanted to know, just around the country, what are we doing? Not just about college or whatever, but how are we making sure Black kids are getting the education they need? What should we be thinking about politically, like if there was a political platform around Black education? Communal and personal agency around it, meaning like if nobody's coming to help us, if nobody's coming to save us, what are we actually doing now? Like, how are we taking care of ourselves? And then finally, as my good friend Chris Stewart always talks about, and we'll lead there, when we talk about Black people, we tend to always problematize or talk about what's wrong. How do we actually sit in our successes for once? Because regardless of everything that might have happened to people, regardless of what's going on in this history, we have been resilient, and there's a lot of things that we are doing right. We are here in Memphis, beautiful, beautiful Memphis. I'm here with friends, I'm here with colleagues, and we're here for a very special engagement. There's this thing that we're doing called the New Niagara, and it's kind of to honor the spirit and idea of what W.E.B. Du Bois and his colleagues were doing just around racial equity back in the day. We're going to be hosting a series of dinner conversations, intimate dinner conversations in 5 cities: Memphis, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Houston, and then Chicago. And tonight is the first night of that here in Memphis. And I'm just really honored to have good people and good friends. Before I ask you all about what you're expecting, let me just explain what we're trying to get at the crux of. In this country, education for Black kids is terrible. Let's just not sugarcoat it. Let's not try to find fancy words. Black kids are not getting the education that they deserve. And what spawned this idea, and it might have gone out of some people's psyche, was when the Supreme Court finally dropped the last nail in the coffin on affirmative action in universities, saying that, hey, you can't use any kind of racialized things to decide who's going where. So I wanted to know, just around the country, what are we doing? Not just about college or whatever, but how are we making sure Black kids are getting the education they need? What should we be thinking about politically, like if there was a political platform around Black education? Communal and personal agency around it, meaning like if nobody's coming to help us, if nobody's coming to save us, what are we actually doing now? Like, how are we taking care of ourselves? And then finally, as my good friend Chris Stewart always talks about, and we'll lead there, when we talk about Black people, we tend to always problematize or talk about what's wrong. How do we actually sit in our successes for once? Because regardless of everything that might have happened to people, regardless of what's going on in this history, we have been resilient, and there's a lot of things that we are doing right. So another part of this dinner tonight is going to be talking about, hey, this has been working really, really well. How do we expand it and how do we support it? So I would just love my friends here to just talk about a little bit about what their role is in this, what they're expecting. But Chris, I just want to start with you, because the joy thing and celebrating our successes thing, that was something that you stressed when we were planning it. So let me just throw it to you so I can just hear a little bit more about that.
I mean, the main point that I have to say about that is we study failure so much, and we talk about failure so much that it can be debilitating. Eventually, people don't want to do anything. You don't start any movement that way, like constantly talking about your failings, especially when you're achieving so much, right? We have so much to be proud of. We're achieving so much. We're just not as organized as we should be. So I love, number one, thank you for pulling it all together, and 2, organizing it in a way, because the one thing that we always need are organizers. People could put stuff together. We all have ideas. Right? But it takes somebody to take the idea and put it on paper and then make it happen. So thank you for that. And man, it's a dream for me to see people come together in the spirit of breaking bread with each other to talk about what are our assets, where do we go from here, what's our plan, right? What can we actually commit to doing? And you're a researcher, so this is the thing that I always think, activism is always missing information. You know, I made up this word, right?
What word did you make up?
Infovism. It's informed activism. Infovism.
I think it has legs.
I think so.
People might start using that.
Josh, I need him to say infovision one more time, and the words.
Infovism.
Just infovism. It's
You gotta
activism.
Give him the type and do the infovism.
Yep.
That's exactly what I thought about. Activism.
Yeah, it's activism that's informed, though. It's informed activism.
But isn't it supposed to be? Isn't activism supposed to be informed?
you have a lot of people who are standing shouting into bullhorns who don't know what you know, right? So they're not taking your research and then getting loud about the stuff that you have studied.
White liberal
right?
progressives.
Right. So there's a way in which to be an activist, just be loud.
That's true.
So you're doing both.
You're
doing both. What's that?
And the louder you are,
The louder you are, more famous you get.
And I'm gonna come to Sharif after this, but but you said something about, for putting it together and things of that nature. I gotta really show love to my assistant Angela, and Tasha and everybody. Like, we have a team behind each of us that have made this possible. But before we even, I wanted to show them love because I could not have done this. I mean, it is stressful to put that stuff together. So thank you for highlighting it. But my partner in crime in this has been J. Artist Wright. And I'll let her talk a little bit more about who she is and the organization she runs. But this thing was hard to run at times, but we met this week we've met every single day in the middle of that, but putting this together. So one, just talk a little bit about your organization and what you're bringing to this, and two, just what you are expecting from this experience.
And if you can add your Philly roots in there, I think it just highlights it even further.
I had to. He now likes me because he found out that my mother's from Philly. And right up the street from him. So
It's just, everybody gotta be from Philly. I love Philadelphia. I love you. That dude over there turns the world against Philly because everything gotta go through Philly.
Philly versus everybody.
I love Philadelphia. I'm glad your microphone is blocking it. It just says you pilly. Stay off the pills. Now, can we please get back to the lady that was about to explain her very important work?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to be here with y'all. First, I have to say, Charles, that we've been rocking for a long time together. When Charles comes to me and says, "Hey, G, I want to work with you," I'm immediately like, "Yep, what we got to do." I'm a writer. So that said, it was very easy for me to accept being a partner with you on this project. I represent an organization called the Freedom Coalition for Charter Schools. It's been around since 2019, and the genesis of it came out of Black and Latino charter school leaders who basically felt like their voices were not being heard, and ultimately wanted to challenge the national narrative around how schools were serving Black and Latinos. And Chris, to your point, I think it's important that you talk about the joy, because we specifically work with charter school leaders who are doing great things and have done them for several years. The charter school movement's been around for 30 years now, and the genesis of it came from Black and Latino leaders who wanted something different than the traditional schools that they had in their neighborhoods. So that's a part of it. The other part of it is, in our mission, is self-determination and parent choice. I think it's important for us to focus on the parents and on the Black community itself, and be really diligent about what those needs are for our communities. And so with that in mind, it just was a natural fit for me to get a part of this project. Yeah, and what's something that that you're expecting from us doing this? Like, if X happens, I feel very go ahead. You said action. Right? Yeah. I mean, the reality of it is that I feel like there have been a lot of iterations of the new Niagara over several years. Some of them with even in our own organizations. To me, what's always been missing is what's next. Like, we get together, we talk about stuff, but what do we do after the talk? And so I want to be really intentional about culminating a conversation and getting some takeaways from it, and then returning to that and figuring out how does that basically inform the next steps for us. And working with my team, that's what I'm always about. I'm always been behind the scenes. I consider Ella Baker my spirit animal, in the sense that when it's time to get stuff done, call Jay. That's what's up, man. I appreciate that, and thank you so much again. The planning of this, and I thank you for your kind words. It's not my ministry. I'm telling you, it is. It was not my ministry, but it's coming together, and I'd be remiss. We are in Memphis. The Memphis Lift is the real MVP. They're hosting us. Sarah Carpenter, who is just a friend and a mentor and family at this point, who also had a very personal tragedy, and I was going to cancel, and she said, absolutely not. My team is going to take care of you and take care of these things, and they wrapped around and are bringing just the city of Memphis out on a Memorial Day weekend, which I just can't thank her enough, especially just all of us know her and have a personal connection to her, and to know somebody who lost a child. It's okay, she said I could talk about it, but to know what she's going through and to still be like, this mission has to go on.
Like we want to be the first city that you host this in, because there are things happening in Memphis and the world needs to know. So she's not here with us physically, but she's here with us spiritually. Miss Sarah's okay, but she had that tragedy. So thank you, Miss Sarah. Thank you to the Memphis Lift. And as I even transition to, my brother, my friend, he looks very buff today. The Philly addict himself, the Philly Pilly guy. Nah, man, I love Sharif El-Mekki, and everybody loves Sharif. That's part of the reason you in here, brother. They do, man. Sharif is our resident celebrity. But I will say this, Sharif, like, when we talk about doing this event and we just talk about the state of Black education, what is that for you? You lead an initiative around Black educators. You've done this for a while. You've been a super principal, a super educator, and now you've dedicated your life to making sure other brothers get into this field. So as an expert on this stuff, what is the state of Black education in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it, on the beginning part, that, Black education has always, been central to any movement in our community. And, even, a lot of times when we talk about Black education, we're always talking about the Americas. But, Black education, first libraries and all of these kind of things, first universities, that was on the continent. So this, this idea of like this way of being, this, the relationship between teaching and learning in Black spaces, in African spaces, has always been consistent. And it may have been strained during the Middle Passage. It may have been, utterly, attempted to be destroyed during enslavement and Reconstruction, and schools being burnt down and then being all of those things happen, and yet we continue to acknowledge like education is tied to liberation, and you have no liberation without education, right? And so for me, whatever the movement is, whatever the plans are, whatever we're doing as communities, if education is not central to that, it's not going to go far. Right, like, and it doesn't have substance if education isn't one of the grounding principles. And this has been one of my critiques of, a lot of our, civil rights organizations, that, like, this has to be the central part, and then everything else are spokes from that. Everything else has to come out of the education, but you can't lose focus on that. And that isn't a 1 year part of, here's our priority for this year or these 5 years. No, this is your priority. What are the other things that are going to orbit around that and support it and protect it? So sadly, there's not a single city that we can talk about in this country that's just en masse safe for Black children. No educational space in this country. And to me, that is just the most damning part of having what everyone was talking about, like, this is first class. There's no first class country without first class education for all citizens. And that has been a consistent part of the America's, lies, is about like how they treat their citizens, and what democracy looks like. That has never protected our folks, yet the bright spots that we see is so often, historically as well as now, been led by Black people for Black people. And that is the piece that I think we have to continue to celebrate and figure out, okay, how do we scale these parts? Because, everyone else is like, scale this, scale that. Like, how do we scale what Black people have always done to ensure that the next generation is better educated?
And I would add to that, how do we own it? Let it be ours. I think to your point, exactly, like too often we create stuff, or we are the, quite frankly, in some cases, the martyr of situations, and then everyone else benefits from that. Right. And I just feel like, that needs to change. We need to be more considerate. It's a part of our culture, as you mentioned. What we do in community is valuable to how we succeed. And I just think that we just make sure that we own it, too. So I would like to add that to it, that 100%. We own it. It's ours. It's okay to say Blacks only.
Oh, I like that. Anything you want to add about the state of Black education right now?
I mean, as Sharif was talking, the one thing that I thought was important is we tend to talk about Black education as if it's failing everywhere. And the one thing that we should do is have really good information about where it's doing the best, right? Even if you say we're not doing as well as we should be doing, there are places in the United States where Black children are actually doing better than white children, right? Very few. Not many, but we don't have enough information on them. There are actually schools that are doing very well with Black children, not many, but we just need to know. We need to have more information and data on them so that we can start, you said the word scale. We can start scaling things that are working and descaling things that are not working for us right now. But we should start from the idea of what's our asset base,
But I want to stay there. And I want to stay there, and I want to start this part with you because, again, you're one of the people that were pushing, like, yo, we need to talk about our successes. Let's talk about the things that's actually going well, that's going right. And in the work that you do, I mean, I'm a researcher, but you're a bit of a researcher yourself in a sense. You've been going around this country looking at school models that have been doing incredible things with kids. I had the luxury and luck of being able to meet you in Gary, Indiana at a school where we saw kids doing amazing things. Why don't you tell us just a little bit that you've seen our people doing so we can just start celebrating now. We ain't got to wait for nobody. We're 2 or more gathered, brother.
So first of all, let me say this about like why Jay is so dope, because the people that Jay represents are actually some of the people that are thinking intently about our children specifically. So they are creating educational environments specific to Black people, not just general, not just for everybody. Our children have a specific, unique situation. And if you're going to teach and educate them, you should be an expert on what the unique situation is. And many of the schools that you all have seen and you represent or whatever are run by people who, even if they're not knocking it out of the park, they're thinking about it every day, all day. It's like what they're obsessed with. Now, you asked about some examples. I'll give you just one example because this blows my mind. I could talk about all the schools that are failing, but you and I went to Gary, and the school that we saw in Gary had 4 young ladies that are graduating with their high school diploma and their BA on the same day. They have 2 of their high school seniors that have pilot's licenses and have already flown alone by themselves, right? If you get your mind around how few Black pilots there are in the United States, how few Black people have licenses, but this school was able to get 2 high school seniors through all of that, you start hearing stories like that. 30% actually just graduated from that high school in the middle of Gary. You know what Gary looks like, right? 30% graduated with their AA degrees, right?
That's wild.
Isn't that crazy? Like in the middle of a city where
not with credits, but you said with the finished with the AA.
Just finished with the AA degree for free, fully paid, no college debt. If you would have never believed that was possible with the kids, what I call the belief gap, you would have never tried to get them there. You would have never kept pushing them that direction, right? And by the way, right, like, you know, they got these degrees and all of that stuff, which I think is really important. But the kids don't seem like they're lacking anything. When you talk to them, you're like thinking they should be more depressed about life or whatever because of their surroundings, and they are not. They are not. They believe, they have hope, and when you talk to them, they're brilliant. We need more of those stories. We need to be able to tell more of those stories, though, so that people understand that it can be done. Because right now, I think most people don't even believe that it can be done.
Man, and before because I'm going to transition to Jay and just some of her stuff, but I want to just stay here for 2 seconds because I talked to somebody there. Me and you talked to her together. I think she drove the bus for the school, and she put her daughter in the school. And while she put her daughter in the school, she also went back to the school. And they ended up graduating, I think, together and going to college together. I don't want to butcher the story, but this school was just allowing for amazing things to happen. So,
and Jay, this is a good story for you because of like what's possible, right? So the mom was the bus driver at the school. She saw her daughter going to the college classes, and her daughter was like, "You should," because she was sitting outside waiting for her daughter during the classes. So her daughter was like, "Mom, why don't you just like enroll?" They got their BAs together, got their master's degrees together. I think one of them is going for a PhD now. She's no longer the bus driver. Now she works at the school as an executive, right?
That's what's up. That's scale too, by the way.
That is scale, isn't it? Right? And a 2-generation strategy in the same place.
Which is, I wanted to get back to that too when we're talking about scale, because I think that's one of the problems that we have in the sector that we're in now, that other people define what success looks like for our kids. And I'm hoping that's one of the expectations that comes out of this, is that we can define for ourselves what success looks like. And I think one of those things is looking at scale differently. Generational success and advancement is scale. You know, you don't have to open 15 buildings to be able to show scale. And I find that in our sector a lot to be the definition of success, and it's not.
Yeah. And I think an important part that both you will hear Malcolm talk about, and you also hear Dr. Fuller talk about, is about like how to institutionalize something. It's not necessarily, you got to have 20 of these in 1 year or it's not a success. It's, can you last 20 years? Can you last 40 years?
Exactly.
Can you last 80 years? And how do you continue to evolve for the contexts that are, and the battles that are sure to come, right? And so that part, and I love the intergenerational part of mom and daughter, right? Because that's one of the ways that you institutionalize something. That's one of the ways that you scale it, because it's scaling because it's impacting more and more people, right? And so that ripple effect, I think I agree with you. Like, part of even the Nguza Saba is defining ourselves. And too often we're defining success, ourselves, our schools, our standards by other people's, often misguided standards. All right. And really understanding how do you ground it in humanity? How do you ground it in children? How do you ground it in the future? And that's what the work actually is.
Can I add a point just here? Because you're asking about the state of Black education. And I think, like, I've been talking about the positive stories that we have to think a lot about, but we do have to take an honest inventory of what we lost.
Assessment. Yeah,
Some of the things we lost, right? So when we lost all the Black teachers after 1954, we never recovered from that, right? So before 1954, the average Black child was in the care of a veteran Black educator every day who actually was better qualified at that time, had more credentials than the white teachers did. And after 1954, we turned over all those kids. We never recovered. The principals that got fired, the teachers that got fired or whatnot. Now, Sharif will tell you it's like 4%, 5% Black teachers, and of that, very few men. We never recovered from that. There were also in the 1970s, 1980s, a lot of Black independent schools, right?
Black schools.
A lot of independent Black schools. And in the mid 80s, there was like a lot of efforts to close them down and whatever. So we lost that. We lost independent. So now you see, this is why I think it's important to take inventory. Now you see all these ESAs being passed, education savings accounts, which is opening up new markets of education. But Black independent schools are an afterthought in that, right? Like us having our own, Jay talks about self-determination. That's why I think we do have to take inventory of what we lost so we can rebuild it.
Right. And I mean, I'm going to get to the self-determination piece. But before that, you talked about these things that was lost, which also make you think of a system and systemically. And Jay, I'm going to start with you because I know in your past, you used to work in politics the way that I used to work in politics, but you were probably a lot more effective in your consulting. What is the political platform that we need to be kind of building that Black people can get behind that ensures that we start to get back or even surpass, what was taken to us on a systematic level?
So the first thing we have to realize is that politics and policy are one and the same. Too often we want to talk about policy, but we don't equate that to politics. They are literally one and the same. You need to have people elected in positions that to ultimately make legislation and laws that are policy that will affect your future. So we've got to reshape how we look at politics as this negative term. It's really where the power is. The stakeholders that make the decisions about the laws that affect us happen from someone who was elected into office. And that has been the history of just our advancement with the civil rights movement and everything before that. Everything that has been given to Black people happened through some level of legislation or law, through policy. And so by that, we have to pay attention to who those politicians are, who those elected leaders are, change them, put our own selves in those positions, and then ultimately power map how we get those things done that we need to get done. But it all rests in policy, and policy is not created without a politician that has the vote.
And I want to go to you, Sharif. Chris, you're on deck, but in the work that you've been doing, Sharif, I know there's definitely a policy component to it. There's definitely, ways that you're trying to activate other people. And as we think about Niagara, and we got these other people that may have never considered, getting involved in those type of processes. I mean, I just know you have a lot to add around what can be accomplished if we get the right, policies and on the political platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical. When I was a younger educator, I was really naive to think that I don't care what the policymakers, politicians, anybody else. My work is right here, grassroots in the school. And as I matured and just became more aware of just all the different layers that policymakers from afar were impacting what was happening in classrooms and in schools and in districts. And I think the more I realized it, the more just determined I was going to be in that space where the policy were being, discussed. And this is why I'm excited about this. These conversations around the country, because so often these conversations are being had just about Black families. often in disparaging terms, you know, about their students, about their communities, about the, you know, these tropes and racist notions about them. And then if you don't look at the full humanity of a child in the community that they come from, how can you possibly create policies that will support them? But everybody will say like, oh, this policy is great for you, but you're racist. So how are you actually coming up with with an anti-racist policy if you are racist? If you have anti-black notions, how are you coming up with policies that actually will support the future and the aspirations of black communities? That doesn't make sense, but that is actually what happens day in and day out. And so, it's just really taught me to, be a part of those conversations, be more aware of, what are the linkages, because it has impact. Like that stuff comes downriver, and it is the exact water that our folks are seeped in. And so we have to just, I think we have to be more aware. And not just aware where, sometimes people are aware and it's like, oh, I'm aware, but I don't need to share. Like, we used to take our students to those policy spaces. We used to take them to city council. We used to take them to the legislation. Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus that I was at the other day, the room was full of students. And I was so happy. They were from Darby. They were from North Penn. They were from Philadelphia. And the room was full of students. And there were policymakers there sharing, here are the things that we're fighting for. Here's the thing we're working for. Here's the wins where you think we can get. Here are the L's and how it will impact you. And students were coming up with questions. One of the best questions a kid asked, we were talking about education. They're like, can you talk about what are the experiences you have as black professionals that we should be aware of in these all white spaces? This is from a 10th, 11th grader, but they're already thinking about it. And we have to, make sure we are educating them in this, much more holistic way.
And I appreciate that. I know we're getting a little tight on time, but if you have something to add on this before I go to the final topic on it, if you want to just, what do you see as the potential of this Niagara platform, Chris, around this political prowess?
Yeah, I think what's so dope about the way you guys are structuring this out is because you're getting to the one thing that everybody needs us to do, which is it's not just about sitting and talking. There's some action that will come out of it and some organized action and maybe some structures, because structures create power, right? Structures create systems. Systems create like the ability to be efficacious, to produce a desired effect. But we need to have that conversation because number one, we need to be teaching our children everything I just said.
Right.
Like the whole world is governed by structures and systems and whatever. That sounds technical, but we need to break that down. And then not just for our young people, we need to break that down as our culture. We need to start saying this has to be part of our cultural thinking. We have to build institutions. See, one of the things like all the people you work with and even the work that you're doing and everybody sitting here, everybody's building something. They're not talking about things. They're building something, a pipeline for new teachers, a pipeline for new schools, a pipeline for new school leaders, new scholarship that actually can be used for all of those things I just said. That's building, right? Now, if we could just get everybody else building. So this new Niagara thing for me, it's great to hear from people. And this is one thing I love that you're doing too. Sometimes when we do these things, we talk to the same people, right? It's like one hand clapping. Right, and we got to stop.
A visual of that,
right? Just one hand clapping, right? And I think what's so dope about what y'all doing is you are talking to different people now, lay people. You're talking to civilians. That's where the power is.
And I agree, and that brings me to this last point. I'm gonna give you an equation because we've had a show together, and y'all know how. It's not that I've lost all my faith in the political process part, but I just don't like I don't want to sit and waiting. And there's an equation, and that equation is self and communal determination plus discernment plus action equals agency. So regardless of what the Supreme Court has done, regardless of these racist practices, regardless of where the funding is, all these other things, like what are we doing to protect our village? Who and the people we're inviting in that room in New Niagara may not be as well versed in some of the things we are on an educational standpoint, but they are geniuses and they are very professional in making sure that they have what they need for their tribe and making sure that they get the type of education they need. So how does agency, and in our closing thoughts from each of you, how does agency show up in this, and what is it that you all are looking to see? And I want to start with Sharif on this one, just because I used to get so not jealous in a bad way, but when he would talk about his academic upbringing, the type of school he went to, what is, being in that kind of, like that environment of that discipline and that love and that education. I mean, that was communal self-determination that in ways that I had never seen. So from somebody who got to experience it from a young child early on, from somebody whose mother has blessed us personally when she was here with us, I just wanted you to be able to bring her spirit up into this part as we close out.
Yeah, Aisha KL Mekki, boy.
The speaker name.
Educator, right? Like I think that self-determination, that agency that we've always displayed, and we talked earlier about just, what did Chris say, like outlawing black surprise about stuff,
right.
like, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, oh, did you see what the Supreme Court just like? I often think about, and I love like reading about history. Not a historian, but I love like, I can appreciate deeply like, just what people did in the past when they were confronted with issues. Just like, all right, well, what did black people do when Plessy versus Ferguson came along? And that was spreading around, and there was, Jim Crow and this, like all of these things. Was it a lot of, sad singing and hand wringing, or was it action? Right, and we saw all of this independence, and you had independent this, that, and they were like creating their own spaces out of that, right? Like as they were also fighting, like, yo, the government can't do this, right? And I think sometimes we're just so married to one way, just like, oh, we got to fight the government and just do that. The state, the politicians are like, that's where I think both the agency part, like, yes, you have to fight, you have to use strategy, you have to use their words and laws and all of that to combat something institutional, and you should be building something simultaneously, right? And I think if we can continue to remind each other, support each other into building both, so having a Nithamu Sasa, having, Dr. Hisong and I just wrote a op-ed talking about like literacy. Like, all right, we've been talking about literacy for black children forever. What are we going to do about that? What are we actually going to do about it? So I shared like something that I remember as a 4-year-old being on my cousin's indoor porch and how they were teaching kids in the neighborhood about literacy and how to read. And this is what it means when you say where's your tongue? All right, when you say street, where's your tongue? Like they were teaching us that, having affirming books, having the words, having us practice with each other, practice. This is what the community, this is a black woman on her porch with a brother who would come and teach it. They weren't waiting. They weren't waiting.
Yeah, and just thank you for that, and thank you to your mother who adopted all of us, and that just wanted to bring her up in the space, man. So hopefully I didn't step over a line on that.
Never.
Jay, just briefly, I don't know if you have anything to add just on this agency piece and this new Niagara that we're doing.
Well, I think that we mentioned a good point here in the fact that we're not doing anything new. I mean, we're called the new Niagara, but we are reinvesting and reminding people who we are and where we come from. And, that's the brilliance about having this opportunity to do it again, because we can learn from where we may have, fallen short before. And I think that's one of the things about doing it in a way now where we have action behind it. I think it's important that we keep it about community and that we don't try to create leaders. I think one of the things that came out of the 60s is that we had these leaders, and then when something happened to those leaders, there was no legacy. There was nothing passed on to the rest of us. It kind of just died when they died. And so those are just some of the things that I'm thinking about in this process, is making sure that we are building a legacy for our children and for our families, that we're focused on our families, that we are reinvesting in what it means to be educated, because it is a part of our culture that came way before we landed on this country. And that we just continue to do this work because we do it well, and we've always done it well. Somebody down the road told us that wasn't the case, and that is not the case. We know how to educate our own. We literally, I'm one generation, but 2 generations removed from a grandmother who learned how to read in a cabin with candlelight. Not too many cultures can say that. And now here I am with a master's degree. So it is built in us, and it's just a matter of reminding us of that and reinvesting in what we know works.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And do you have anything to add on this agency piece in New Niagara?
Well, since she got a master's, I'm just wondering if we have to call her Master J. Right. I think we should institute that. this is what I'll add is agency. I'm glad that you've given name to this, and this has become the thing that you educate the public on and you've thought a lot about, because people don't know the name of it, but it has always existed. It's the reason why we're sitting here right now. In a lot of cases, let's not be surprised anymore, because first of all, let me just back up. Think about who your oldest ancestor is that you can remember, or that you know about, that you've learned about. And then think about from them to the next ancestor all the way to you, that in every one of those time periods, there was a problem. We were always fighting to move forward. And here we are today sitting with you with a PhD and Master J over there. And my man over there who's probably a master's too. Like you are the example of agency, and this is why we are still alive. This is why we are still surviving, because we have agency, self-determination, and we keep pushing forward on it. So my only thing is the thing that we're missing oftentimes is what you're doing here with the Niagara thing, which is organization. Yeah. Connectedness and organization. We all have agency to a little bit, but are we using it together for a purpose to move forward?
Well, look, I mean, with that, what we're looking forward to, I'm gonna close out with this. We're looking forward to being humble with these people tonight, to learning from them, to learning what it is that they've been doing, what's working, to understand what they think that political platform should be, and to just get an understanding of where they are, and just to get a sense and feel their own discernment around what's been happening. And what I'll just say on this agency piece is this, man. People here talk about reading. Like, there's a reason, there's a connection. If you think there isn't a connection, again, Chris told you can't be surprised no more. Slave masters would not let enslaved people learn how to read, because a person that was literate was not fit to be a slave. And then I grew up in a city of Oakland right now where 2 or 3 out of 10 black kids are able to read on grade level. There's a regression, and I don't think that that's by accident. And I think that's where discernment steps in at. When things look fishy, they often are. But we're coming to you right now from Memphis, and the next time you see us, we'll be coming from Philadelphia. So that's Chris, that's Jay, that's Sharif, I'm Charles, and you all pray for us in this new Niagara joint. Y'all have a good one. Peace.
Peace.